Hello, and thank you for joining us for this MaritzCX webinar, Pinpointing the Experiences That Matter Most. We're glad you've joined us today. I'm Tom Evans, and I'll be moderating today's event. On the program with me are our two presenters, our special guest, Nita Sporseen from Washington State Employees Credit Union, and Jennifer Passini from MaritzCX. And we'll introduce both of them more formally in just a minute. But let's answer a couple questions before we get started. And those are, one, is the webinar being recorded? And the answer to that is yes. This webcast is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the presentation within the next 24 hours. And then secondly, we are planning to have a time of Q&A after the presentation is concluded. So if you have a question during the presentation, just type that into the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many of those submitted questions as we can during that time. So now let's meet today's presenters. We'll start with our special guest, Nita Sporseen from WSECU. Nita is part of a dedicated CX team, and she acts as both lead service designer and user researcher. She takes point on WSECU's Voice of Member program, which is an array of surveys that provide transactional, relationship, web intercept, and unsolicited feedback. She also designs surveys for point-in-time research needs to support product design and experience improvement. And as a designer, Nita plays the role of in-house consultant, providing mapping, analysis, and implementation support to projects, both large and small. So we're very happy to have Nita with us today. And then next we have our own Jennifer Passini. Jennifer is Senior Director of Solution Strategy for MaritzCX, and she is responsible for providing CX consultative support to organizations that are looking to implement new CX programs or enhance their existing efforts. And she's been doing that for about 18 years, so I know she's definitely accumulated a lot of great knowledge over those years and working with clients of all types and sizes. So we're always thankful for JP's willingness to share her expertise with us on webcasts like this one. And now I'm actually going to turn it over to Jennifer and let her kick us off. So, Jennifer?
Thanks, Tom, and I want to thank everyone for joining today's session. I'd like to particularly thank Nita from Washington State Employee Credit Union for agreeing to present today. In today's session, you will receive a lot of food of thought related to how to isolate moments that matter, and then what to do with that information once you have it. So we're really looking forward to Anita's presentation today. I thought I'd just start with just to kind of tee things up for everyone. So all of your customers are on a journey with you. And some of these journeys may be simple with few curves or bumps in the road. However, I suspect that for most of the organizations that you represent, your journeys are more complicated with different paths or micro journeys that make focusing on the most important things difficult. So how do you isolate the moments that matter or the experiences that, when delivered well, lead to long-lasting and loyal relationships? That's really what we're going to talk about today. So Nita joins us to talk about a concept of salience, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to her to talk about how her organization has focused on understanding those moments that matter and how their focus on salience and salient experiences has made a difference. Nita, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom and Jennifer. And thanks, everybody, for joining us to talk about this. I know that figuring out where to spend our time as CX teams is always something that's kind of at top of mind. So we'll go ahead and dig in to talk about what my team has discovered at WSECU regarding figuring out which moments seem to matter most to our members and how to prioritize those. So to begin, I want to just kind of talk about this idea of this salience, this concept, and where it came from. It was really born out of pain for our team as a CX team, probably similar to most of you, struggling to find sort of deal with the delta between the amount of resources that we had both on our team and with our partners across the organization, and the number of experience initiatives that we thought were really valuable and could make a difference for our members. We always had more work than we had hours. And when we were prioritizing things sort of in the traditional way by the numbers, looking at the number of members impacted and the frequency and things like that, we weren't seeing the results that we wanted in our overall metrics as we were looking at our key performance indicators. But we were discovering through kind of parallel research that in our relationship survey data, a lot of our members were sharing strong emotional feedback about experiences that they'd had in the distant past, many months or sometimes even several years in the past. And we started to wonder what was making those things hang on for those people and really impact the way they thought about us, and what made those things top of mind when they had the opportunity to fill in, a text box and tell us about their feelings, and how were those driving the kinds of ways that they thought about us as an organization. So we dug into this idea of salience and started to think about it as this concept of impact, as more than just frequency, but type of interaction and the way that it can really drive somebody's memories and the durability of those memories, making that experience really resonate for that person. And the reason that we think it's important is because if we can figure out what types of experiences those are, we can tap into the moments that are shaping the way people think, which drives what they do, and then the stories that they tell both to themselves internally as they're making decisions and to the people around them as they're being your, promoters or detractors, as word of mouth is happening in, communities and across social media, and really influencing the way people think about organizations. So when I started working on this with my team, we were thinking about what makes moments memorable in general, and a lot of things sprung to mind for us that were personal, but we tried to dive into in our own lives, kind of anecdotally, what drove memorability with brands. What brands did we love? What brands did we hate? And could we pinpoint any particular past experiences, recent or preferably long in the past, that were very clear and lucid for us, that were influencing the way that we thought about them? And as we tapped into those ourselves and then did more research with our members and talked to other folks who weren't on our team, we found that that was sort of a through line. For me in particular, anecdotally, I have bought several cars over my life, probably 5 or 6 cars. There's only one car buying experience that isn't fuzzy in my mind. I remember every detail of it. I remember the price at the first dealership that I went to, and I remember almost closing the deal with them, but something going terribly wrong, and then deciding to drive more than 100 miles to a different dealership because that relationship got broken so badly. And those things do drive how I make decisions and how I talk to people about where I think they should buy a car if they're getting a similar type. And we wanted to dig into those types of moments and think about, for our users, what was making them stick. The reason we really decided to spend time on this was because these types of really strong memories do cascade into people's belief systems. And we think that's for 2 reasons. One is because subconsciously, when you have that sort of very visceral emotional response, it becomes a part of how you are naturally going to think about those brands in the future, and you may not even realize that it's happening, but it's that thing in the back of your mind or the pit of your stomach when you're interacting or have the opportunity to interact or make a product choice. But they're also consciously part of the stories, like I said, that we're telling ourselves and others, and if they're the kind that we bring up as funny or delightful or kind of tragic moments that we've had with companies, and we recall them over and over, it gets really ingrained in a way that influences our decisions, which has downstream effects on our loyalty as consumers, is definitely going to drive how we make purchases and the way that we advocate or don't for the companies that we appreciate or don't. And then right here, I just want to take a moment to pause on the salience idea and talk really quickly about sort of a tangentially related thought that we've been just kind of starting to dig into about the assumed motives of organizations. It's another trend that we've seen come alongside, where so many times when we get strong feedback from our members, the association is not just this thing went poorly and it was frustrating for me, or it was high effort for me, or I didn't like how it turned out. There's a layer of motive associated to the brand. This thing went poorly in this way, and I assume you did it on purpose. I assume it was because your intent was X. And I think a lot of times that's a normal human reaction to a situation, is to assign what might feel like very human motive to a company that's making very clean business decisions and isn't trying to, ruin anybody's day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's not how that feels. And I think those types of feelings that think of companies much more like people and less like business entities can really also impact those salient moments. So I've kind of been skirting around the idea of salience. Let's dive into what we think the factors are that make a particular experience matter this way, that make it salient. So we think of it in three pieces. One is the novelty or infrequency of the interaction. So we think that things that are happening for the first time ever, or things that someone does infrequently, are more likely to be memorable because they can't be easily erased by frequent future interactions of a similar type. In our world, a lot of times that looks like a mortgage, or like a refinancing, or dealing with moving your finances after somebody you love has passed away, and you're dealing with kind of that inheritance situation. Those things happen infrequently, and there's always a first time for those types of kind of high stakes moments. And so that's the second piece, is the stakes that are involved, and that could be financial stakes, or it could be more about the way the person is feeling about this. So onto the third bullet, the emotional entanglement that a person has with the type of interaction and the potential outcomes of the experience or the interaction, we think also really drives salience. And one key factor that we found here as we were doing some research in this area was that it's not just the emotional entanglement of the individual participating directly in the interaction, can also be related to the emotional responsibility that they have for other people who are going to be impacted. So I'll call back to that mortgage example. If, say a dad of young kids is working on getting a mortgage situated so that he can move his family, and he knows that moving is stressful for, his wife and his family, all of their hope and concern and anxiety about the move and the new house and where's my bedroom going to be, all of those things get wrapped up, not just his own emotions, but their emotions as well, into this interaction and play a part in making it really memorable. So as we think about whether or not an experience is going to be or likely to be salient, these are the three things we try to pinpoint. Is it novel or something that happens infrequently? How high are the stakes for this person if it goes well or poorly? And how emotionally involved are they in this interaction and the outcomes? And then it gets a little bit more complex. That seems pretty cut and dried, right? Just a few bullets. But what we began to learn is that salience has some fuzzy edges. So a lot of times salience, as you might imagine from the last slide, is tied up with like a major life milestone or a life stage. Oftentimes those types of milestones are salient or surround salient moments, but not all salient moments are related to major milestones. And then another thing to keep in mind is that there are some types of interactions that are only salient sometimes, and context really plays a huge role in those interactions. So let me give you a couple of examples. So these context matter moments, something like buying your everyday latte is not necessarily salient, even if it goes terribly badly. If you go back Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you probably don't remember Monday's bad latte. And maybe even takes a couple of weeks, but eventually that moment gets sort of overwritten. However, if you are taking your boss out to your favorite coffee shop and, it's a new boss, a new relationship, and you want to make a good impression, and they make your boss's coffee wrong or spill something on that person, you're probably going to remember that a little longer. The other example we have here is a credit card decline. This is definitely something that's unpleasant, kind of in any context. Nobody wants to see this happen, but it's a much more salient moment if the time when it's getting declined is in front of an audience, particularly one that you're concerned about with the impression that you're making, like on a first date or taking out somebody from work, something like that. As we continue to think about context, I mentioned earlier that life stages often influence the salience of experiences. We think about things like marriage and divorce, a first job, first child, first home, moving, retirement, losing a loved one. And then we think about what types of interactions for our organization are happening during those moments that might not be pivotal. For us, they might seem fairly simple. Maybe it's just a piece of paperwork or the changing of a name, things like that seem very kind of rote. But for this person, because of the external context that's happening in their lives and the amount of stress they may be under during some of these situations, the moment needs to go well. And if it does, they'll be appreciative for the support that they've gotten. And if it doesn't, they're really likely to remember it. Another thing that we think about when we're considering context is understanding who we're working with, not just their life stage, but also sort of their background. So we definitely use personas and grouping our members to try to understand what might be unique for them and particularly salient for them. So I'll give you another example here. We spent some time over the past few years developing a couple of different experiences and products for millennials. And as we were doing that, we did quite a bit of user research and interviews to get to know them a little bit better, along with a lot of market research that was existing about sort of that cohort. And we found that in financial services, some of the things that are most important in shaping the way that they think about finances, and particularly lending, are the way that they experienced the downturn in the economy and the housing crisis. And many of them weren't adults who were directly impacted by it as a homeowner, but they were aware of the situation that was happening. Some of them lived in homes that did get foreclosed, or they saw the stress that their parents had facing that as a possibility, even if it didn't happen in their family, which created a lot of fear. And we also know that a huge number of them are spending a lot of time at colleges and universities and racking up student debt, and that feels to them like an unavoidable burden, but also something that's putting them at risk. So the idea for them of taking on additional debt, even something as simple as like a starter credit card that can help them build credit and potentially be a positive influence in their financial journey, can be very frightening and very shame associated because of the context of what they came of age with as they were learning about finances as adolescents and young adults. And I'm going to leave you with one more thought about context before we jump onto the next kind of topic about prioritization. As we talked about, some experiences are only salient sometimes, and it can be a little bit less predictable because it's not life stage related. It's not necessarily going to be important all the time for a particular cohort. And these can be difficult to identify and to expect, but that doesn't mean that we don't spend our time trying. We do spend some time trying to figure out what types of things might fall into this bucket. So that something that we've found has been helpful is to do this activity where we think about like a common experience and then work with a group to list types of things that could make that less than every day. So we think about spending money with a card in our context as financial services, and we think about what makes that card swipe go wrong, and if it does go wrong, why does it matter more than normal? and try to identify what types of surrounding context could make that happen. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the negative context, like what could make it special, what could make it important, what could make it stand out or make it memorable. We're also doing what we can to partner internally with our data scientists and analysts and experts and partners in our operational divisions so that we can learn how and what we're able to track and measure and predict regarding those types of contexts and interactions so that we can get better at understanding how those are related to scores we're already collecting through things like our interaction survey and try to get a tighter handle on listing out our most common salient moments. Another thing that we do is just kind of look for hints in the data that we already have available in our Voice of Member platform. So we're looking for things like volatility in scores and spikes that seem unrelated to kind of current happenings, but might need more explanation. And sometimes if you dig into those, you find something a little bit bigger and a little bit deeper, and it could be something salient. Additionally, we collect unsolicited feedback and complaints, and that's another important place to look for this because sometimes people don't complain right away. And if you can find patterns in the people who are complaining about something quite a while after it's happened, you're likely onto something as far as a salient moment. So let's get into a little bit of prioritization. So when we think about prioritizing salience, it started as something that we felt was a little complicated because it's pretty subjective. Salience is much more difficult to wrap numbers around than frequency or number of members affected, things like that. So we've broken salience sort of into two buckets. One is usually salient experiences. So things for us in financial services like a mortgage or a fraud situation, we know are often going to be surrounded by context that makes them salient. It's also those small moments that I mentioned earlier. It's things like the paperwork that you take care of as you're changing your name following a marriage or a divorce. It's, working with our frontline staff as you're setting up the first account for your first child. That's much more impactful than setting up a new account in a different situation. So we kind of group all of those together as our usually salient experiences. And of course, within that, we've got ones that we think are salient for most people most of the time, and some that might only be salient for a particular group if we've done some persona kind of investigation. And then in the second bucket, we think about things that are sometimes salient. So those are those things we just talked about where we have figured out that this type of interaction might be everyday most of the time, but there are moments or circumstances in which it becomes very impactful. And we try to define both the when and the in what context part of that so that we can figure out like what exactly about that type of experience might make it salient and keep an eye on those as well as our second priority. And then once we've focused on those salient experiences and the sometimes salient experiences, then we think about everything else. And this is actually, for us, it's cascading into the way that we prioritize not just experiences initiatives for our team, but our entire organization is pulling this into our methodology for prioritizing organization-wide work that's being done by digital teams and project teams, as well as like product design. As we are considering what we want to build and what we want to fix, this is sort of driving that conversation when we talk about member value. As I mentioned before, salience is subjective, so it's something that's really important to calibrate on as a team and beyond your CX team if you're able to work with partners to help everyone sort of understand the concept really well. And what we're doing as a team is producing a quarterly report that identifies key themes and salient moments within each theme so that the organization can have a really clear through line to what each of those moments might be that we should spend time on. And that report is driving some of our prioritization, and our team is dedicating quite a bit of time to analyzing all of our feedback posts across the board to feed into that new effort to provide a lot of clarity about where we should be spending time. And then another thing that we have learned is that Salience isn't something that stands alone. So we use it as kind of a modifier. We're looking at volume still. We didn't kind of throw those measures away. We still want to know how frequently things are happening, how often people are doing something. And so we're factoring Salience against those types of things, like the number of users impacted, because there are times where something is tremendously salient, but it might only happen, you know, for 10 users in a month. And not that we don't want to spend time on those experiences, but if we can find other salient experiences that are happening for quite a few more users, or we can pinpoint particular parts of the organization that frequently handle salient experiences and work with them directly, people like our fraud teams and our mortgage teams. We know that those will be big wins if we can spend our time there. And one last thought that I wanted to leave you with before I hand it back to JP for some additional thoughts about Salience is that we, as we've worked beyond our CX team in the organization, developing this Salience idea and kind of evangelizing it throughout the organization, we've discovered that it's so much bigger than just CX from an application standpoint. Our partners in product design, product development are definitely using it as they're considering the features that are most important and where they need to meet users through a product lifecycle. Our UX designers and digital design teams have really latched onto this as they're looking at the ways that they kind of integrate, not just for prioritization, but also for building out features and patterns and things like that. And it's beginning to also play a role in how we're thinking about operational strategy, channels, and things like that. So we really see this as something that, you know, for us at least in our organization, may have been born out of CX, but can definitely be used beyond our department's walls, and we're pretty excited about that. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jennifer.
Thanks, Nita. That was great. And so I'm just going to wrap up with a few considerations for ensuring Salience. I think that Nita and her program are fairly involved in their thinking, and there's some definite kind of tee up that needs to happen, or just some steps that need to be taken before you're ready to explore Salience. The first is really making sure that you know the customer journey. So I started the conversation today talking about customers are on a journey with you, and so it's really important that you understand the journey first. I think about, if you think about your own organization, you understand that the customer journey is probably based on where they are in the life cycle. Nita gave some examples of that, you know, just looking at different milestones or, you know, even life stages for some organizations, that because of where they are in the life cycle with you as a customer or their life stage, that they have some things that are important to them at that point that are driving their choices and how they experience different companies. And so considering that and really understanding that as part of your journey, understanding helps define those experiences and helps you get closer to understanding the moments that matter. Without that clear understanding of the customer journey, it's going to be hard for you to isolate the moments that matter. And taking it to the next level, understanding those salient moments that Nita talks about. So it's really important that that you know the journey and that you're able to think about that at both at an individual and a collective level. MaritzCX encourages our clients to consider creating at least a high-level customer journey map to help support your CX measurement and management program. But Nita gives a lot of examples about how it can be used beyond that to support designing experiences or to help other groups such as product development and operational strategy. And so there's some real meat to why this is important. So if you have a detailed understanding of your customer journey, you can later support root cause analyses, identifying those pain points, particularly around the salient activities that might be negatively impacting customers' journey so that you have something clear to fix. So as we think about the journey, and as you create your journey, it's tempting just to kind of map that out using your internal resources. I think we can all agree that if you pull a group of employees aside and ask them to describe the journey that your customers have with you, they could probably do a pretty good job. Particularly your frontline employees and those that interact with your customers every day, they're going to be able to help you identify those pain points and impacting experiences. But a lot of what Nita was talking about today in terms of those salient experiences is not just about what they're experiencing, it's about the reaction that it left, that the reaction that the customer had, the emotions that it yielded, and their emotional reactions, all of which you have to rely on the customers to provide that. So while, a lot of, in particular, a lot of the salient experiences that Nita described today are those things that have a true impact on customer satisfaction levels and loyalty that you can really only gauge by talking with customers and asking for them to describe their journey, their interconnectedness of experiences. Nita talked a lot about making sure that you understand the context of those so that you truly understand those moments that have an impact on their perceptions of you. So we not only encourage that you create a customer journey, but that you leverage external perspectives to do so. And with the risk of sounding like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, I think that the other thing that we encourage is that you consider internal perspectives. So obviously the customer perspectives are important, but you also have a lot of internal resources, as I mentioned, including your frontline staff, but also back office and leadership that can help you understand the customer journey and identification of salient moments. Nita talked a lot about techniques that her group has used by leveraging different types of resources to brainstorm, the salient moments and what could happen. She talked about other resources that she uses in terms of prioritization so that they know where to focus as an organization. So leverage your internal resources to connect the dots in customer experience so that you have structured support and also that you have a way to deliver those things later. So the most important thing is you might identify salient moments or moments that matter, but if you haven't thought through how to execute on those, either from a measurement management standpoint for your CX program or from an experience design standpoint, then they're just moments. You're not doing anything with those. So you leverage your internal resources to ensure that the insights that you generate are put to use and that you can understand what's possible within the organization, what's viable for your organization. And so both, in short, both external and internal perspectives are important here. One thing I think is also important to mention from Nita's presentation is that the salient moments that she's describing, there's some context to those. And so, while a lot of organizations rely on quantitative research and you rely on your feedback programs to provide customer insights around the customer journey, there will also be a need for some qualitative efforts so that you can more deeply explore those moments. What happened? What was the reaction? What led to the reaction? What's the impact? What emotions did it yield? Those are things that are pretty difficult to collect as part of an ongoing tracking feedback system, but qualitative research infused with that can help. So the last thing that I'll just mention is that a lot of the questions around prioritization can be answered through an analytic plan. So analyses that explore derived importance, the financial and business connections or impact, and other exploratory analyses of subgroups can not only help to isolate those moments that matter and the magnitude of importance of those things, but also can provide more context and business impact so that you know what happens when you don't deliver on those particular experiences. So as you're thinking about this for your program, we would encourage that you establish an analytic plan to help set those priorities, and that you can you can combine it with some of the performance metrics that you already have. So things like driver modeling. MaritzCX has a proprietary technique called Merit driver analysis that helps identify those drivers of derived importance. Performance improvement planning, where you can look at those drivers against performance outcomes. Exploratory analyses to explore subgroups that are more likely to have those experiences so that you know where to focus. Nita gave an example of millennials and the need for specific product experiences and also communication experiences. And then most importantly, all of those salient events have a business impact. So you need to understand the role of those experiences on financial and business influence so that you can further set some priorities. And Tom, I think that's a wrap. So can I turn it over to you for some questions? I think we've had some questions come in throughout the presentation, so we'll go ahead and take those.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Nita and Jen. Great. Man, we've all experienced those moments that matter as consumers, and they do matter a lot. So we do have some questions that come in that can't have come in. Let's start with this one. Nita, if you want to take it, what does a salient moment look like in a B2B context? We talked a little bit about B2C. How about in a B2B world?
Yeah, I've actually spent some time pondering this more on with myself as like the end user, but I think the B2B context is actually really interesting, and I do think it still applies. I think that when you're considering what types of context make things matter most in B2B, figuring out what is driving high stress, high emotion, high stakes times at your business customers' workplaces can be really meaningful. So if you can tap into what time of year is this business like in their budget cycle, and do we play a significant role in helping them feel adequately prepared for that, and how can we support them in a time that they might be under high stress? Or is there some like annual or biannual reporting that they provide to like a high stakes group, and we can really be there as like an asset and the support through that. Those types of things can be important. I also think that transition moments matter for everyone, whether you're just an individual consumer or if you're in a business context working with another business. And so anytime you've got somebody kind of new coming on, being onboarded, or leaving who might need support, like moving your services to the next person who's going to, represent the kind of user end for them, I think those moments can be really pivotal. So it's a similar idea, different context, but I think in the same way, if you can tap into those emotional moments, I know a lot of times we like to think that we're very kind of logical at work and that we're getting work our work face on, but we do have a lot of stress, a lot of kind of ebbs and flows and seasonality, and those types of things can be really impactful in how and when we show up for each other in B2B context.
Great, yeah, perfect. So thank you. Jennifer, how often should moments that matter be assessed? And the second part of that is, do they change over time?
So there's not a quick answer to this one, but I think that in general, moments that matter can change over time, and so it's important to have some mechanism in place for evaluating that and just looking for changes. And moments that matter change because of changes in the marketplace. Changes just in other industries can influence that. So, I think that all of you would agree, regardless of your industry, that companies like Amazon and their digital experiences has changed how we view digital experiences in other industries. And so how often should they be assessed? It really depends on the organization. I think Annually taking a look at that through various mechanisms would probably suffice. But depending on your industry and the nature of change within your industry, it might need to be more frequently.
Okay, thank you. And then Nita, what are some examples of measures in your quarterly salience reporting?
That's a great question. And it's a little squishy. So what I would say is, as far as like hard measures go, like quantitative measures, we stripped most of that out of this type of reporting. So we report on our highest level key performance indicators for our two big solicited surveys, so our relationship survey and our interaction survey. And it does not get a lot of like visual space in the report. The vast majority of what we provide is our analysis and perspective on what the major driving themes are based on like verbatim analysis through text analytics and just a lot of kind of hands-on research, and then places that those themes are specifically present in key moments across the organization. So like we'll have a theme, and then we will have examples of here's 6 places where that theme is showing up that's currently a key moment and a pain point that we should focus on. And then we've got an appendix that we use to derive so much of what we provide that's got all sorts of quantitative data, things like satisfaction with time to complete an interaction or solve a problem, data about channel switching, from which channel to which channel and for which reasons, all sorts of stuff like that. But what we've found is that the more we tried to provide quantitative data in the past, the more that the recipients would really get lost in the numbers and find it hard to get to what was actionable, even if like we followed it up with a recommendation. And I had advice from a friend recently who kind of is in the CX world that they always start with the recommendations of what they think everyone should start doing and stop doing, and then follow it up with the numbers. Because what they found is if you start with the numbers, the people who are interpreting the numbers are either going to be happy with the number and not want to do anything, or they're going to be freaked out by the number and they're going to be so busy trying to create solutions in their mind that they have a hard time hearing the recommendations afterwards. So, some of that advice is at play here. It's definitely like insight and analysis first and then measurement after.
All right, great. And switching back, so Jennifer, I'll let you take this one. Would you equate salient experiences to moments of truth in member journeys?
Yep. So this is a good question. So I would equate, and I hope Nita agrees, but I would equate salient experiences to moments of truth on steroids. In that, what I mean by that is that they are so there's a lot of aspects of the journey and there's a lot of experiences that matter. So if you are a company and you don't deliver on a particular activity, then that's a moment of truth because it's a delivery point. But salient experiences kind of takes it to the next level, in that these are experiences that if you don't deliver them well, your customers are going to remember. Because they're not only memorable because of the experience itself, but they're memorable because you didn't deliver. So I think it's a bit more advanced in just kind of exploring those key moments of a journey. So if you think about Nita's example in terms of the one car experience that she remembers, she remembers it not because it's a pretty big purchase for her, but she remembers it because of the experiences that she had. And so if you think about those types of experiences that make or break your relationship with customers, I think within financial services, it could be fraud events that aren't handled well, or it could be, the loan application process that, drags on for months and months and months that don't really meet expectations. All of those things are key moments of truth, but the way that you deliver and the emotional reaction and the uniqueness of the experience, also the involved on the customer's part, all lead for that to potentially be a salient moment of truth.
Perfect. And Nita, this one's for you. It says, Nita, thank you for the simple breakdown of salient experiences. How might a company increase frequency of recall to create more salient memories?
That's a really, I think that's an insightful question. That's something that we're thinking about more like on the product design side than the CX side. I think right now we've got enough existing salient moments that we're trying to address that when we're thinking about creating them, a lot of times we're thinking about them as like brand new experiences. And so the way that we're putting that into play in product design, which our team kind of does a lot of collaborative work with, is considering what might be something that might not be an expectation of an interaction that someone would have, but that they may be having like an emotional circumstance that isn't going to drive them to you, but that you can help improve. So I'll give you an example. We talked a little bit about millennials and lending. I think that we pinpointed some key moments that we really wanted to be able to show up for young borrowers through credit cards that we were developing at WSECU. And part of what we wanted to do was recognize that they're feeling, some anxiety and fear around lending and borrowing and things like that, not wanting to get in over their heads. And they might not be coming to us in those moments looking for help, not thinking that we are the advocate. So as we are noticing things that are happening in their account, where can we show up and provide encouragement and guidance so that it shows that we, A, recognize what they're feeling and going through, and B, are present and are an advocate in those moments. So I think those are the opportunities to kind of increase recall, is to look for the times when a person might not be coming to you in a salient moment, but they might be in a salient state of mind, if you will, and you can go to them in a way that would be well received and impactful.
Perfect. Jennifer, how does understanding the moments that matter influence the design of a CX program?
Well, the biggest thing is that the biggest outcome is that you focus your measurement system on those areas. So for the most part, at least from my experience, it is extremely difficult to focus a measurement system in all areas, either from an investment standpoint or from a sample availability standpoint, or just given the limitations of the program in general. So understanding the moments that matter helps you focus your measurement system in those areas, so that you're not measuring things that have little impact on customers' perceptions of you, or customers' journey, or whether they're satisfied and loyal with you overall. You're not focused on the things that don't really matter. You can focus on the things that truly matter, and track your performance against those things, so that if you're not performing well in a particular area that truly matters to your customers, that you can remediate that, and there's not a whole lot of noise around it. And that's really why understanding customer journey is important, because without it, you could take steps to kind of boil the ocean. But with it, you can focus your measurement system in the areas that that you're truly going to have an impact on the customer experience in general, and that you're focusing on areas that are going to impact your relationship with them, and ultimately the things that are important to your business too, in terms of creating deeper relationships with customers, or at a minimum retaining their business.
Great. And we just have a couple more questions, but so if you're out there and you have a question, please submit it. But let's go with this one. Nita, what are some key steps as you begin launching a listening program? And JP, you might have some input on that as well, but Nita, let's start with you.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. Two key things come to mind immediately for me. One is, as you're figuring out what you want to ask, I think of three important components. One is finding out what your audience is curious about, what they feel like they don't know, what they feel like they might know, but they think it might be wrong, and they need to be validated. So really knowing that like you're asking the kind of questions that'll be valued by the people who are going to be using the data. And then secondly, looking at best practices for, key performance indicators and things like that, and what might be most meaningful for your context. But I think thirdly, and most importantly, when you're thinking about what to ask, something that often gets overlooked is considering what your users, your customers, your members want to be asked. Really being thoughtful about what they care about enough to tell you, and maybe even launching kind of a pilot and seeing what types of things come through in your open ends, and if there's some sort of commonalities there that can manifest themselves in more structured questions. If that's something that you're finding you get a lot of kind of unstructured feedback about, maybe there's a place there. We use that when we think about what goes into our surveys to try to ensure that what we're asking, the survey experience itself will be meaningful and positive for the people who are taking it. And then another thing that comes to my mind is considering early what your plan is for closing the loop. And, resources are challenging for us to be able to do like a one-to-one closed loop situation where we're following up on all of our surveys. That's certainly not something that we're able to do for all of our VOC program, but what we do spend a lot of time thinking about, like, how can we get messaging out to the membership that shows them that what they are willing to spend their time telling us is valuable to us and that they're heard. So like, we definitely were hungry to get data early, but we wanted to be sure also that we were ready to be able to share back and kind of close that loop with our members.
Great. And here's an interesting question. So are there times when you don't want a salient transaction? So for instance, this person says when they're paying by a credit card, they just want it to go fast and easy. They're not necessarily looking for a wow factor. JP?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I think that it still can be a salient transaction even if you want it fast and easy, because a great example, and I know I spoke about Amazon earlier just in terms of, their e-commerce experiences, but I think one thing that was kind of a wow factor for a lot of users within the Amazon platform was a one-click purchase. So that was a wow factor for a lot of people. I think that what makes it a salient experience. There's a lot of reasons an experience could be salient. Let me just start there. So it could be that it's high involvement, large purchase tied to a milestone. I think a salient experience can also be, another definition of a salient experience could be one that fully meets and exceeds your expectations. And so I think that in that particular case, an interaction can be fast and easy, and if it blows your mind, at least the initial time that you do it, then it still can be a salient experience.
Okay. Nita, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that hits it right on. I think that's definitely a moment where, because of the way it was designed and built, something that would have been very forgettable was impactful for a lot of people. And I think, as an organization, you don't want all of your experiences to be salient because we simply don't have time to make all of them stick for everyone. And people are so saturated with the amount of stimulus that they're interacting with your users and things that you want to make sure that the key moments they're having with you do have their attention, and when you do have that kind of attention and potential durability, that you're spending time there. So I think it's okay for there to be, places where you you maybe spend a lot of time getting it right so that something's easy and quick, and it may not be salient, and that's okay, as long as it's frictionless and you're out of their way and they can accomplish what they want to with you, because there will be other times where you show up in a way that really does build that memory for them.
Great. And we're going to end with this last question, and that is, how can we get partners and leaders on board with using such a subjective measurement? And Nita, you want to take that one?
Yeah, you know, I love that question because, you know, as we were working on this new prioritization matrix, one thing that was asked of our team by the committee was, how can we make the member experience objective? And I just sort of chuckled, you know, because they're humans and their emotions and their memories, and those things are really hard to wrap numbers around. So one thing that we've done when we're working with leaders and partners is doing some like one-on-one or small group work where they get to see the actual verbatim feedback, or even better, if you can get like user interviews or diary studies or something like that that's really meaty from somebody who has gone through a salient experience with you and has strong feelings to share, positive, negative, you know, whatever they may be. If you can produce those types of artifacts and show like, this is the kind of way that we impact people in key moments, and we know how to identify these kind of moments, and we're, you know, working on making it into a system, those artifacts are really powerful and really drive things home in a way that I think numbers can't. So that's an important part of it. And I think also the calibration within teams and any collaborative partners you have who are going to be figuring out like how you bucket and sort of try to quantify salience in respect to itself in different types of experiences is impactful too, because that will make business partners who really would like to have kind of more of a structure around it feel more comfortable if you can at least produce some sort of order or grouping to show that while this is subjective, it's still something that we can have something more than an opinion about.
Awesome, thank you. And that's going to do it for today. Thank you for joining us for the presentation today. I want to especially thank Nita and from WSECU and Jennifer Passini for the amount of effort and time they put into today's presentation. And thanks also to Daniel Johansson, who runs the technical production of the events that we have, the webinars. And thanks, of course, to all of you for joining us. And if you have any questions after today's webinar, you can reach out to Jennifer Passini. You see her email there on the screen. And with that, we're going to close it. And until next time, have a great day. Thank you.